So the next question becomes, where did the Cold War really come from? If during World War II, Russia and the United States were besties, why did we suddenly start hating each other and hate each other for 50 years? And the truth is that we never really liked each other. We were just using each other to do each other's dirty work when it comes to World War II. Um, so I say that there are basically two main roots of the Cold War. The first is competing global objectives. We wanted the world to be a capitalistic democracy, and the Soviet Union, they were calling themselves communists, and that's what they wanted the world to be. And these are radically different ideas from one another, and so as a result, we're going to clash. And these different economic and political systems not only relied on in terms of our own countries, but like I said, our geopolitical relationships with others. Plus, after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were the only two countries really left super strong. And so, therefore, we were kind of left to play, if you will, to kind of do whatever we wanted, whether it be in the guise of helping other countries or whether it be, sincerely trying to form new countries or new colonies, whatever the case may be. And so, we're going to fight with the Soviet Union for international dominance without ever once officially declaring war on them. And that's why it's called cold. Because unlike other wars in the past where you would declare war and you would square off and you would militarily fight on the battlefields, instead we're fighting in the homes of the hearts of everyone, ideologically. That isn't to say that we weren't prepared to go to war with Russia. We were. We had armed weaponry and we were very open about it. Armed conflict was always present, that threat. And so we had to kind of watch out. And so we're going to usher in what's called this arms race, where we're going to try to build the biggest and best weapons, and then they're going to answer us by building improved weapons of what we had just finished. What did we hate about the Soviet Union? We didn't like that their government ran their economy. We tend to be more laissez-faire in our approach, whereas in the Soviet Union they are very hands-on, very dictatorial. We didn't like one-party rule. The only political party in Russia that was allowed to exist, let alone rule, was the Communist Party, and it didn't allow for opposition. We're a country that's formed on the idea that there should be at least two. Russia also had a suppression of religion, according to Karl Marx, the founder of communism. Religion is the opiate of the mind. We have other things that we should be focusing on besides these lofty theological notions. And we didn't like that because, again, we're a country that says freedom of religion is good. And we didn't like Stalin in particular using force to crush anybody within his country or elsewhere that opposed him. Russia did not like us because we were the opposite, right? Of all those things that I just said that we didn't like about them, they liked that about them and didn't like that we were the inverse. Russia's also going to engage in expansionism, where they're going to literally go and try to carve out new countries and take those and put them as part of their own country. Stalin claimed that he was conquering Eastern Europe in order so that they could be, buffer zones, areas that he could keep safe from the big bad Western countries of France and Germany. These countries had been so strong and powerful and had conquered them before. When in reality, he was basically putting these areas that would keep him safe from invasions by those same countries. In these countries that he conquered, he would put in what were called satellite governments. So he would pick the leader, and these were leaders that he could easily control. They were like puppet countries. And so they weren't independent. They were really forced to do Stalin's bidding. And we didn't like this very much. Here you can kind of see those countries in blue at the height of the Cold War would be the countries that were our allies, and then the countries in red were the countries at some point that were allies with the Soviet Union. So they had a decent amount of support. As a result, it's going to prompt Britain, France, and the United States to continue to control Western Europe. We wanted to try to have our own buffer areas. And so we're going to do differently. Instead of creating satellite nations, we're almost going to bribe those countries to be our friends, where we're going to spend vast amounts of money in terms of trying to help them to improve, to grow economically strong again following the war, to be, much more competitive in the global market, and also to try to encourage democracy to form. So in theory, we'll color a map that you'll see, there was a division between Europe And you can kind of see it on this previous map where half of Europe is blue and the other half is red. This division, this theoretical division, becomes known as the Iron Curtain. Winston Churchill quoted, made a big speech, and he's like, a great iron curtain has descended throughout all of Europe. Not literally, obviously, an iron curtain. It was just this hypothetical, theoretical division between the two. After the Iron Curtain has fallen, we are going to try to engage in a policy known as containment, where we are going to seek to contain communism to one side in one little area and not let it expand. And this is going to become our major guiding principle for the next 50 years. Don't let communism spread, no matter what. Contain it to Russia as much as possible and keep it there. And this is just another map that shows the Iron Curtain idea, drawn in dark black. Like I said, we're going to engage in this arms race, and that's pretty scary when you stop and think about it, because really the whole point was seeing who could build the biggest and best and most powerful weapons. We had dropped the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This showed to the Soviets that they needed to develop the same, if not better, technology, and we were constantly scared that they were going to try to outdo us. So because of this fear, U.S. Presidential Advisor Bernard Baruch is going to create this agency, like a committee, whose whole job it was to keep an eye on atomic energy development and to try to limit the spread of atomic energy knowledge. This becomes known as the Baruch Plan. It imposed penalties on countries that didn't follow international rules. So the idea was you would, it's kind of another one of these Kroger Plus cards. If you bought into it, you agreed you wouldn't develop any more atomic weapons, or if you did, you would allow this committee to come in and to investigate. Up until this point, we had refused to reveal any of our atomic energy secrets. The Manhattan Project had been the group that created all of our atomic energy knowledge. We did not want anything from there seeping out. However, it did, through a variety of ways. There's obviously going to be scandals that involve the idea of espionage and us people here selling those secrets to the Russians and others. Nonetheless, this plan is going to pretty much fail. Russia flat out denies joining it. They said, no, we're not going to let people come in and look in our country. What we're doing is our business. And so Russia's going to test its first atomic bomb in 1949. And this is going to really terrify us, because now we realize they have the same energy we do, if not better. We're going to have to keep developing. Congress is going to respond by passing the Atomic Energy Act in August of 1946. And this act creates the Atomic Energy Commission. And the whole point was to oversee nuclear weapon research as well as promote peacetime use of atomic energy. Because when atomic energy can be used safely, when we can harness it, when we can, market it in certain areas, it can be a rather clean energy source. It's just so volatile that we don't necessarily understand it still to this day. So now we are officially, in this arms race with the Soviet Union. And now things have kind of heated up a little bit, right, in the Cold War. So now that they have become our armed opponent, Truman is going to be forced to become more aggressive. Greece is going to be the first country where this aggression is played out. Greece was in a civil war that started in 1946, where communists within Greece started to fight against the traditional Greek monarchy. Truman wanted to try and keep the traditional government, even though he didn't really like them, because he was scared of communism spreading. So that would be against the containment policy. The monarchy of Greece had been receiving aid from Britain, but Britain announced that it couldn't help Greece anymore. It just didn't have the money. It was too in debt from World War II. So at the same time, so Greece is going to be, abandoned basically. At the same time, Russia starts deciding it wants land in Turkey, which is real near Greece. If this happened, USSR would gain control of the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea and then be able to push across and possibly take over Greece, aiding the communist rebels there. So Truman's going to create what's called the Truman Doctrine, which we've mentioned before, that said that he would support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. Specifically, he was going to help any country who was actively fighting against communists. And here's Greece actively fighting against communists. So Congress is going to agree and approve hundreds of millions of dollars to be spent in Greece and a little bit in Turkey in order to resist the communists there. And this is ultimately going to be successful. Um, all of Europe, not just Greece and Turkey, they all suffer. They all are struggling after World War II. Their land was destroyed from the war that ravaged through the continent for 6 years, and then you throw on top of it that right after World War II, they had a couple of really bad winters, some of the worst blizzards that the continent ever had. And so the land was really bad. They couldn't farm. They were struggling to form industry because so many people were killed in the war. And so what's going to happen is it seemed like if we didn't get involved, communism, since it was right there, was going to be able to walk in. Communism appeals to poor people, and at this point in time, a lot of Europe was poor. So our Secretary of State, George Marshall, is going to, being scared that Europe faced an economic, social, and political collapse, works with Truman and Congress and decides, let's send $17 billion to Europe for economic rebuilding. And nobody really supported this plan at first. We're like, well, why are we sending all this money over there? We should be spending this money on ourselves. But when we watched USSR take advantage of these situations and overthrow Czechoslovakia, it was kind of the wake-up call that we needed to allow us to get the support necessary from Congress to pass the Marshall Plan. It was passed in April of 1948, and for it, George Marshall won the Nobel Peace Prize. So the Marshall Plan was us giving money to Europe to help them rebuild, and it's going to work in tandem with the Truman Doctrine, where we're going to help those countries fighting communism rebuild. And here you can see a map that shows the amount of money that we spend in various nations, particularly Russia, Italy, and the United Kingdom are going to receive the largest amounts of our financial support from the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is also going to contribute to Western Germany becoming strong. The problem was that they're connected to their friends in Eastern Germany, which was suffering economically because the Soviet Union wasn't managing them the same that we were managing the Western sides. So, in 1948, Britain, France, and the US, we combined our three zones of influence into one bigger, stronger, more powerful Western Germany. And this is going to anger the USSR. They didn't think that was fair. So the USSR is going to block all roads and other means of transportation that linked Western Germany with Western Berlin, our capital, like I showed you on that map earlier. And this is going to cut off all food and fuel supplies to the capital for Western Germany. On June 24, 1948, Western leaders knew that Berlin was suffering and decided to use a whole bunch of planes to fly over 2 million tons of foods and supplies into the people of Berlin. It was specifically West Berlin, although we, quote, accidentally dropped a little bit into Eastern Berlin as well because we did feel bad for those people. And this becomes known as the Berlin Airlift. It was a huge embarrassment for the USSR. They were like, oh, you trumped us, you flew past our blockade, what were you doing there? And so ultimately Russia is going to lift their blockade in May of 1949. But it's important to note that this whole thing clearly and definitively and finally establishes the notion of East and West Germany, and that's going to last for around 40 years. And so here you can see the little map that shows that.